All right, so we're going to start out with the animal cell here. Okay, I'm going to write down the names. Okay, and I'm going to try and write as neatly as possible for you, right, so that you have all the names. I'm also going to talk briefly about the functions. If you want, you can put down like a quick jot note about the function if you want, but we are going to go over in detail starting today what all the different organelles, that's the parts of the cell, okay, do, and we'll look at that. All right, so you don't need to write a whole bunch about what each one does, but if you want to write, digest food or something like that, like something quick, that would be fine. Okay. All right, so in the animal cell, what mode of nutrition do animal cells use? They are chemoheterotrophs, okay? So they're consuming other organisms and using the organic molecules that make them up for food. Okay, so we're going to start right here with this little circle that looks empty. Okay, this is what we call a peroxisome. A peroxisome is like a lysosome, except there's no food in it yet. Okay, so a peroxisome and a lysosome both contain digestive enzymes. It's just that in a lysosome, lysis is actually going on. That is the breaking down of organic material. Okay, in a peroxisome, there's just the digestive enzymes, and it hasn't encountered any food particles yet. All right, so we're going to go clockwise around here. So the next thing are these kind of light colored, kind of faded looking thread-like deals. Don't call them the faded thread-like deals. That's not what they are. Okay, these are part of what we call the cytoskeleton. These in particular are what we call microfilaments. Okay, and that's part of the cytoskeleton. Now, I would say your best bet when labeling a diagram of a cell, if you see something like that, that you just label it cytoskeleton, because the cytoskeleton actually is made up of microfilaments, microfibers, and microtubules. And from varying diagrams, it's hard to tell the difference. They all serve essentially the same function. That is, they support the cell when it tries to change shape or stretch or whatever. They keep it from essentially rupturing. Okay, they're like big giant bungee cords that attach to the inside of the cell membrane and keep the cell from becoming overstretched. Okay. All right, thing right next to it here, this sausage-shaped deal. What do we call that? Those are the mitochondria. And there are lots of them. Because they burn sugar for energy. Okay, they are where cellular respiration occurs. So the sugars produced by the lysosome or just that are simply acquired through the cell membrane find their way to the mitochondria where they are broken down and their energy is released. Essentially, it's a combustion reaction that's going on inside of those things all the time. So they have a double membrane. Okay? And the double membrane actually insulates the rest of the cell from the heat that's produced in those. Okay, for some reason, every animal cell diagram has one of these on it. Almost no cells actually have those on it. In fact, if you're female, you don't have any cells in your body that have these on them. If you're male, you have a few million. It's a flagellum. It's what sperm use to swim. Okay, the euglena you looked at yesterday also had a flagellum. Not that you could see it under the magnification that we had. Okay, so this big tail-like thing is called a flagellum. All right, the next three things have to do with the big purple thing. What's the big purple thing? Okay, so there's a special layer that goes around the outside of the nucleus. Okay, what do we call any like outer layer when we're talking about parts of a cell? It's a membrane. Okay, so this is the nuclear membrane, this first one. Okay, the nuclear membrane is probably the, let's say, tightest maybe isn't the right word, but the most secure membrane that there is. Basically nothing gets into the nucleus. Why is it so important to keep stuff out of the nucleus? right? All your DNA is in there, okay? And if anything happens to that, that's the only copy of all the instructions to do everything the cell needs, okay? So it's, I don't know that there's even a comparison. It's like Fort Knox. Like, you got to keep people out of there. Very valuable stuff is in there. Okay? If anything happens to that stuff, you know, the results would be very bad. We don't want anything to happen to the DNA, because if it does, the cell could die, the cell might malfunction, okay, things like that. The one thing that does get in is genetic material, and that's how a virus, we talked about that the other day, can kind of circumvent the security of the nuclear membrane. Okay, a virus puts its DNA into the cell, and it migrates and finds its way into the nucleus, writes itself into the nucleus, and then makes your cell make viruses, right? Because its DNA looks just like yours, and the cell doesn't know the difference. It just keeps following the instructions. All right, everybody with me there? All right, so the next one here is the nucleus. Now, somewhere along the way, some well-meaning elementary school or maybe even junior high teacher told you that the nucleus is the brain of the cell, and it's not. This is my other trigger along with triangles, okay? The nucleus is not a brain, okay? In fact, it doesn't really do a lot of control or decision-making or anything like that like a brain would do. That's why I don't like that analogy, okay? A brain exerts active control and passive control over processes that govern how your body works. The nucleus doesn't do that. Okay? The nucleus is a storehouse. If anything, it's a library. Okay? It's closer to a library than it is to a brain. It stores your genetic information, protects it, keeps it safe. Okay? Allows access to it when needed. Okay? But that's it. The nucleus doesn't really control anything. Right? Now, the darker dot that's inside the nucleus is called the nucleolus. Notice how similar the spellings are. Spelling counts on these two. I mean, it should really count on the others as well, but I'm very particular about the nucleus and the nucleolus, okay? Because I've had people on tests, and I know this is what they're doing. They're like, oh, I can't remember which one's which. I'll write it like this. And Mr. Cordero will take pity on me. I have no pity, okay? That's just spelt wrong. I don't know what that is. Nucleolus. It says to me, you either can't spell or you don't know the difference between the nucleus and the nucleolus, and you're trying to pull one over on me. Either way, okay? Those are two that you have to absolutely spell right so that I know for sure you know what you're talking about. All right? The nucleolus actually does control something, okay? It controls protein synthesis. Your cell has to make all kinds of different proteins all the time as part of normal functioning. Okay, so what your nucleolus does is it receives kind of the orders from the other parts of the cell. And by orders, I don't mean like you do this now. I mean like a request for something. Okay, so if your cell needs to, let's say, make something like insulin, okay, it'll put in an order to the nucleus saying, we need the instructions for insulin because we got to make some. So the nucleolus will find the part of your DNA. So it's kind of like a librarian. Okay, it goes into the library and looks for the part of your DNA that tells how to make insulin, and it makes a copy of that, and then it sends the copy out into the cell so that the instructions can be used to make that particular protein. Okay, that's as much as you'll need to know about protein synthesis, basically in high school. Okay, you'll take like entire courses on it in university if you take biochemistry, and it got really confusing then. You guys are smarter than me, so you probably do fine in biochemistry. Okay, so does that make sense what the nucleolus does? Okay, it essentially copies the DNA and makes protein synthesis possible. Okay. All right, all these little dots, okay, you see that some of them are kind of just floating free inside the cell, and a lot of them are attached to this blue stuff here. Okay, these little dots work with the nucleolus, okay, to make proteins. They're called ribosomes. Ribosomes are like a site or a shop foreman, okay? They're the ones that can take the instructions, figure out how to get the materials that are needed, assign jobs to people to put those materials together and create a final product. Okay, so that's what the job of the ribosomes is to actually carry out the synthesis of proteins. All right, down below that, the blue stuff that's covered with ribosomes is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. You will be relieved to know that I will accept rough ER as the name for that. Okay? ER will stand for endoplasmic reticulum, not emergency room. No, this is reticulum, so it's ULUM. One L. Yeah, now I was making an effort to write neater too. That's okay. I know my writing's terrible. Better? I was running out of room. I'm going to blame that. I ran out of room. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right. Next thing, continuing on clockwise. The outer layer of the cell is the cell membrane in an animal cell. Yes. Okay. Do plant cells also have a cell membrane? Yes. All cells have a cell membrane. Some cells also have a cell wall. Okay. Animals don't, obviously, because we talked about that the other day. Right. The cell membrane is the border. Okay, it's border security. If you've ever watched that show on National Geographic, they're the ones that make sure bad people and bad things don't get in. Well, that's what the cell membrane is also supposed to do. It's supposed to make sure that stuff that isn't good for the cell or whatever don't get into the cell. Is it infallible? No. Okay, lots of stuff will get by, just like lots of people and things get past border security. Okay, some people are just good at sneaking stuff by, and that happens with the cell membrane too, but it, for the most part, does a pretty good job of controlling what gets in and out. Some things move across it passively, especially water. Okay, water goes across the cell membrane no problem because water's pretty safe. Oh, just extend. Sometimes the cell membrane will fold on itself and create a greater surface area. All right, so this blue stuff that doesn't have any of the dots on it, similar to the stuff with the dots on it? Yeah, so it's similar to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, except in comparison it looks smooth. Yeah, so this is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And again, you can call that ER. The rough endoplasmic reticulum transports proteins. That's why it's covered with ribosomes. They can quickly transport the proteins the ribosomes make. Since the smooth ER doesn't have any ribosomes on it, that's not its job. But the smooth ER is probably, next to the nucleus, the most important organelle in the cell. It has many jobs. Okay? It is responsible for repairing and producing membrane material. And your cell is in constant need of membrane material. Okay? Because membranes are the outer barrier to things, and they get damaged all the time. So they're constantly in need of repair. The cell's going to grow. It needs to produce more. Okay? So the smooth endoplasmic reticulum actually synthesizes lipids, which is fats, and that's what your cell membranes are made of. It also detoxifies poisons. Okay? Stuff gets into the cell. Sometimes even stuff the cell produces as waste products is toxic, and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is responsible for breaking a lot of those toxic materials down. Okay. The reason that it's responsible for that is it's everywhere. This diagram only shows it in one small part of the cell, but it's actually everywhere in the cell. And it has quick access to the cell membrane because part of its job is to repair and build membrane. So it's always touching the membrane. So if there's toxic materials that are being broken down, that's something we probably want to get rid of pretty quickly. So that can help with that as well. Okay. It can also help with the breakdown of starches. Okay, so if starches come in, starches are essentially sugars that are all linked together. So your lysosomes typically don't bother with stuff that already looks like sugar. Starch looks like sugar, so it doesn't break it down, but the smooth ER does. Right, so it'll break down complex carbohydrates. So if you had a big pasta meal or a whole bunch of rice, okay, the smooth ER is what's taking the starch that's in that stuff and making it into more simple sugars for the mitochondria to use. No, there's quite a variance in size of animal cells. Yeah. Because they're structurally similar. Yeah, would be the answer to that. That's why they are named similar. Endoplasmic reticulum is just this stuff that kind of goes everywhere within the cyto or endoplasm of the cell. Yeah. Okay, next thing in line over here is this strange looking object. Okay, this is the Golgi apparatus. Okay. The Golgi apparatus is responsible for packaging and excreting waste products. Okay. It's also responsible for exporting any products that a particular cell might make. So if we're talking about like the cells of your adrenal gland, make adrenaline. Well, the Golgi apparatus not only exports wastes to the cell membrane, it also exports whatever the cell is supposed to export, which in this case would be the hormone adrenaline. Okay, or if we were looking at the pancreas, it would be the hormone insulin. Okay, this thing is responsible for, it's a shipping center. Okay, it packages the stuff and sends it to the membrane to get rid of it or to send it out. Okay, moving along here, we've got this little bubble that has stuff in it. So this is the lysosome. No, there's fluid between the cells called interstitial fluid. And that is the stuff that eventually gets to your bloodstream, right? So stuff can diffuse, and we're going to talk about that today, move from high concentration to low concentration, because your blood's always moving. Toxins are usually lower in concentration in the blood than they are in the cells, so stuff just naturally moves to the blood from there. Oh, it's small. I mean, we're talking really small spaces, but there's still a space there. All right, we already talked about what the lysosome did. Okay, now we can see these much thicker kind of thread-like things, except that it's hard to see in this diagram, but they are actually tubes. Okay, so these are microtubules. Okay, and they are also part of the cytoskeleton. Just label it cytoskeleton. Yeah, if anything that looks thread or tube-like that's just kind of running through the cell is the cytoskeleton. All right, then we got these two gear-looking things here that are sitting next to the nucleus. These are only found in animal cells. Plant cells don't have these. Okay, these are the centrioles. That's an E. Still doesn't look like an E. Okay, the centrioles help when the cell is dividing. Okay, so when a cell is about to divide, one will go to one end of the cell and the other will go to the other end. Okay, what they do then is, as the cell is dividing, the nucleus actually disappears. The nuclear membrane just dissolves, and all of the DNA gathers together to form your chromosomes. Okay, so at cell division, all the chromosomes line up along the middle of the cell on what's called the metaphase plate. You don't need to know that. Okay, but they line up right there. And then the centrioles will send out little fibers, much like the cytoskeleton fibers, that will attach to each chromosome. That happens from each end. And what happens then is the centrioles will pull the DNA to the separate sides of the cell, essentially ensuring that each cell gets all the DNA it's supposed to get. No more, no less. Okay? They have a specific number of fibers that they send out that gets every chromosome that is needed. The reason animal cells need those and plant cells don't is because animal cells can change shape. Okay? And if that shape change or a twist or something like that happens during the cell division, it's possible then that some of the DNA would end up on the wrong side. Okay? A plant cell doesn't need these because its shape is rigid, and when it divides, it doesn't have to worry about that. No, these are, it's slightly different in structure. Okay, these are separated. These are joined together. This is just contractile fibers. That's what allows it to move. Okay. These are made of fibers. They're going to send fibers out. Sorry, Andrew, you had a question too. Oh, mostly carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and nitrogen. It's organic, right? So it's going to be mostly that stuff. Yep, until cell division happens, the centrioles basically just hang out next to the nucleus until they're needed. Yep. Oh, we're going to get to that. Yep, because that was my next thing, because it doesn't have an arrow. Yes, okay. So you all need to add a little line that just finds a empty spot, like right there in the cell. And I made that one too long. I don't have room to write on the end of it. Okay, the fluid that fills up a cell, and a cell is filled with fluid, because if a cell was filled with air, what would all the organelles do? Well, they might. They would all fall to the bottom, okay? They need some sort of fluid to float in, okay? And the fluid is also necessary for anything to transport, okay? For diffusion and osmosis and all that kind of stuff to happen, there has to be a fluid, not air, okay? I mean, they can happen in air as well, but it's not as efficient as it is in a fluid. Now, it's not filled with water, but it's close to water, okay? It's called cytoplasm, and it has a consistency that's, again, not quite water. It's a little bit more viscous than water, just slightly more. Basically, the cytoplasm just facilitates cell transport, supports the organelles, things like that. Yeah, sometimes you get that kind of clear fluid coming out, right? It's not like pus, because pus is like green, right, and gross and smells bad. But yeah, the kind of the fluid, yeah, is basically interstitial fluid. Some of it's cytoplasm. It's all about the same consistency. So is cytoplasm also known as endoplasm? I've honestly never heard it ever called endoplasm, but everyone just refers to it as cytoplasm. Okay, questions on the animal cell? Now, the plant cell will go a lot faster because how much of this stuff are we going to double up on? A lot of it. Jackson. We're actually going to talk about that in a bit, but the surface of the membrane is not smooth like it appears in this picture. It's covered in all kinds of chemical receptors. And so when something touches the cell membrane, the cell membrane can detect essentially what it is. It's like having a bunch of sensors on the outside of the cell. And if it's a certain thing, it'll diffuse through, or sometimes the cell will engulf it and take it in that way. Okay, any other questions on the animal cell? All right, so for the plant cell, okay, we'll start right here with this big blue thing, right? So the big blue thing is the water vacuole. Okay, and when we were talking about modes of nutrition, we said the water vacuole helps to support the shape of the cell. Okay? It exerts something called Turgor pressure, okay, which is it pushes everything on the inside of the cell against the cell wall. And that helps to keep the plant kind of firm. Okay? I mean, you've all seen what happens to a plant if you don't water it, right? Right, like it wilts. Unfortunately, I just recently watered all of my plants, so none of them look terribly sick. No, it always looks like that. Yeah, it's just not a healthy tree. Okay. But yeah, they start to wilt. Like, I mean, in this one here, I mean, it got kind of beyond that and got crunchy because I forgot to water it. Okay, but whatever. They start to wilt if they're not getting enough water. So they look kind of limp, right? And they kind of curl around. And the reason for that is because the cell wall on its own can't support the shape of the cell. Okay? If this thing starts to get low, okay, if the cell starts to get low on water, or the surrounding plant starts to get low on water, salts will build up in other places in the cell and around the cell. And then the process of osmosis will happen, and that's passive. The plant can't control that. That's water moves from an area where there's less salt to more salt in order to balance the concentration. So it actually pulls water out of the vacuole, and then the cell starts to get limp, okay, and wilt. Again, they come in all sizes. Like it's hard to even generalize that plant cells, if plant cells are always bigger than animal cells. I would say probably in general, yes, but it's not a hard and fast rule. There are some really big animal cells and there are some really, really tiny ones. Really nothing. It's not going to overfill, right? It'll just kind of swell and the plant cells will be really, really firm. Okay, the biggest worry if you overwater a plant is that you'll suffocate the roots. Okay, they need to have access to air and oxygen as well, and if they're submerged or saturated, then they don't exchange gases as well. All right, so that's the water vacuole. The water vacuole has a special membrane around it, and the special membrane is called the tonoplast. Okay, because it exerts the water vacuole exerts a lot of pressure, it needs a fairly elastic special membrane. All right, going clockwise around. Okay, we see the mitochondria again. Mitochondria do the same thing in a plant cell as they do in an animal cell. They burn sugar for energy. Just they get the sugar from photosynthesis as opposed to from the lysosome because the animal ate something. Okay. Is it ribosomes that bring the sugar? What moves the sugar? Sugar basically just moves through diffusion, which is a passive process. And that's something we're going to talk about. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but it's one of the things we're talking about this week. Okay, then next on the way down here, we've got the little dots, okay, which are the ribosomes. What's that? Oh, it's because it's pointing at another mitochondria. Yeah, that's why. This is like pre-Photoshop editing of mine. I've been using this awesome diagram for a very, very long time. But you had to use paint back then. Yeah. At some point, I'll not be lazy and I'll make it nicer, but too late for you guys. Okay. Then you can see here we got these two little lines and they're pointing at these fibers here, which are in the case of the plant cell, cellulose fibers. Well, they serve a similar purpose, but they're not exactly the same. Okay. Cellulose is plant fiber. It's dietary fiber. Okay, so if you ever heard, you need to have more fiber in your diet, blah, 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 that's the kind of fiber they're talking about. Cellulose fiber is the fiber that plants create, and we can't digest it. Okay, so if we eat like celery or beans and things like that have lots of fiber in them, we don't get any energy from that fiber. Okay? If we eat beans, we get the energy from the sugars and starches and things like that are in them, but the actual fiber, stringy parts of them, we can't digest. Okay? The outside of corn, okay, if you've eaten corn, okay, like the outside of the corn kernels is also high in cellulose fiber. We don't digest it. I think you know where I'm going with this. Okay? It essentially passes right through our entire digestive tract completely unaltered. Right? Yes, we get some energy out of the other materials, but we don't digest the fiber part of it. Right? If you're a herbivore like a cow or a deer, they have specialized stomachs and digestive tracts that actually allow them to get energy from that material that we can't. That's why it does us no good to eat grass. Okay? We will get no nutritional value from eating grass. Right? It just doesn't have enough energy in it. We can't break it down. Right? But a herbivore has a 4-chambered stomach. Okay, and so when they eat it, it goes through it goes through 2 chambers, and then they puke it up and chew it again, and then they swallow it again, and then it gets digested and goes all the way through. You never seen a cow chew in their cud? It's quite disgusting, actually. Okay. If you see like the kind of white stuff, kind of drooly looking stuff coming down, it's because they've puked up some of the grass they ate and are chewing it again. Yeah. Now, do you feel bad about eating cows? They're gross. You should totally eat them. Because it cleans you out. Yes, that's the good part of dietary fiber is if you don't eat a high fiber diet, stuff ends up getting stuck in your intestines, in your digestive tract, and as it essentially decomposes inside of you, and that can create infections, inflammation, things like diverticulitis and peritonitis and stuff like that. That's quite painful and can be medically serious, can cause a bowel obstruction in serious cases. So fiber essentially it acts like a big brush, and when you eat it, it just cleans out all the tubes on its way. It's part of the support. It's essentially what the cell wall is made out of. The cell walls of plants are made out of cellulose fiber. Okay, but there's some of it inside the cell as well.
So like on the test, can we put like cytoskeleton for like this one?
For the plant, no, because the plant doesn't use a cytoskeleton like the animal cell does. It uses the wall and the water vacuole for support, right? It doesn't need the elastic fibers. Okay, then the big green thing, that's the chloroplast. And what does it do? Carries out what process? Photosynthesis. Guys, honestly, on a test or a quiz, if I have that label, if there's an arrow coming from that, chloroplast carries out photosynthesis. Good enough. Okay. On a quiz or a test, I don't want a long paragraph answer for what the object does. I just want a brief description. Okay, these little holes here, I actually took the label off, but there's holes that go through the membrane and through the cell wall of a plant cell that allow it to exchange cytoplasm with nearby cells. It's kind of a way for them to exchange nutrients and things like that. Okay, animal cells don't do that, but plant cells do because the wall is a bit of a barrier. So there's these little holes in the wall. They're called plasmodesmata, but I'm not even going to put that on there because I'm never going to ask you about that. It's just if I didn't label it, one of you would have asked what they were. Plasmodesmata is what they are. Okay? No, it's not. Yeah. Okay. Then we've got, what's this orange thing? What was it called in the animal cell? Golgi apparatus. Does the same job. Okay? It excretes waste. Okay, and then we can see the cell wall is cut away here so that we can see the what? The cell membrane. Okay, cell membrane does the same job and is essentially similar in structure to the animal cell membrane. Okay, and then outside of that is the cell wall. And honestly, cell wall is probably one of the worst misnomers that there has ever been. Okay, because when we talk about a wall, we picture something like that. It's solid. I couldn't walk through it, nor will I attempt to demonstrate doing so. Okay. It's just not a good idea. But a cell's wall is more like a frame. Okay, if you've ever watched a house being built, it's, you know, when they first frame the walls, you could walk through the spaces between the studs. That's more like what the cell wall is. Okay, it serves zero protective function whatsoever. Okay, it has no protective function at all. The cell membrane is what does the protecting. Okay, because I often see that cell wall protects the cell. Nope. Okay, the cell wall is a frame. It supports the cell's shape along with the water vacuole. Okay, that's all that those two things do is support the shape of the cell.
If it doesn't like stop anything from coming through and stuff, why is there like need to be little holes?
Because the fibers that make it up can be quite close together, but it's not a solid barrier. Yeah. Okay. So the reason for the holes is to allow, if cytoplasm can go between cells, transport is much faster than if it has to go through the membrane, through the other cell's membrane, and then into the other cell. If their cytoplasms are shared, it can just go right through. So that's why it has the holes. Yeah? It's not so much to get through the wall, it's more to get through the membrane. Yeah. A lot of nutrients do, but it's not being acquired from outside the cell. It's being traded between cells. Okay. All right. This thing here, I forgot to take that off. Oh, there we go. Wow, that's delayed reaction. No, it really even shouldn't be there because it looks like a peroxisome, and Plant cells don't have those because they don't digest food. So yeah, just take that off. It shouldn't even be there.
So, do the plant cells connect together when they share the cytoplasm?
There's just a little bit of cytoplasm that can connect through these holes. It'd be like if I had a pipe that was connecting two houses. That's kind of what it is, right? Well, they could. Basically, anything can go through those plasmodesmata from one cell to the other. It just allows it to happen quickly, as opposed to having diffused through the membrane. It essentially circumvents the membrane. It's like having a tunnel underneath the border. Okay, it's like a sneaky way, you know, with nobody to check you out and to get from one country to another. Yeah, I'm really starting to run out of analogies here. That one, I think. No, the viruses aren't going to go through that tunnel. Just basically nutrients, fluid, yeah, like sugars, proteins probably wouldn't even fit. Okay, things like that. Oh yeah, just totally a good thing. Yes, it just allows cells to quickly share materials without them having to go through each one's membrane. Because going through the membrane is not a quick process especially if you're like a non-water-based molecule. They just don't. I don't have a better answer than that. I mean, they could. Toxins could easily go through there too. That's just kind of the trade-off, right? Okay, what's this stuff? Smooth ER, right? Okay, and then above that, the rough ER, they still do all the same jobs as they did in the animal cell. Okay, purple dot in the middle, Nucleolus. Okay, and then this one here is the nucleus, and then the nuclear membrane. Okay, and we don't have a line for cytoplasm, so we'll just quickly make one. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's basically exactly the same because it is essentially just water. Okay, any other questions on the plant cell? What did I just do on this diagram that I should never do on a lab drawing? I crossed two lines, and I had lines going to all sides. Right? Remember, on your lab diagrams, they should just go to one side. There just wasn't enough room on this to do it. Okay, we'll move on to the functions here.